The school cafeteria smelled like overcooked vegetables and disinfectant. 7-year-old Daniel sat at the corner table, the one nobody wanted because it was right next to the trash bins. His sandwich sat untouched in front of him, still wrapped in plastic. He wasn't hungry. He never was during lunch anymore. Around him, the cafeteria buzzed with noise. Kids laughed, shouted, traded snacks, and complained about teachers. But at Daniel's table, there was only silence. He traced invisible patterns on the table with his finger, pretending he didn't notice the group of boys at the next table stealing glances at him and whispering. Daniel had Down syndrome. He'd been born with it, though he didn't really understand what that meant when he was younger. All he knew was that he looked different. His eyes had a special shape that other kids didn't have. His tongue was a bit larger, making his words come out slower and sometimes unclear. His body moved differently, too, not as quick or coordinated as the other children. Most days, Daniel wished he could just be invisible. But that was impossible when you were different. Different meant you stood out whether you wanted to or not. The bell rang for recess and Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Lunch was hard, but recess was worse. At least during lunch, he could sit quietly and be left alone. Recess meant going outside where there was nowhere to hide, where the games happened without him, where the laughter often felt like it was aimed at him rather than with him. He walked slowly to the playground, dragging his feet. A group of kids ran past him toward the basketball court, their excitement filling the air. Daniel used to try joining them. He'd ask if he could play, his words coming out carefully, each one an effort. They'd look at each other, make excuses, say they already had enough players. Sometimes they'd let him stand on the sidelines, but he never got to touch the ball. After a while, he stopped asking. Instead, Daniel found his spot under the big oak tree near the fence. From there, he could watch everyone else play without being in the way. He'd sit in the dirt, sometimes picking up leaves and tearing them into tiny pieces, sometimes just staring at the clouds. Today, though, things were different. 3 boys from his class walked over to his tree. Daniel recognized them immediately. There was Kevin, the tallest kid in 2nd grade. Next to him was Brandon, who always had the newest sneakers. And then there was Ryan, who loved making people laugh even if it meant someone else had to be the joke. "Hey, look who it is," Ryan said, his voice loud enough for other kids to hear. "It's Daniel." "Hey, Daniel, what you doing under the tree all by yourself?" Daniel looked up but didn't answer. He'd learned that sometimes saying nothing was safer than saying something. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" Kevin laughed at his own joke. "Oh, wait, I forgot. You talk funny anyway," the other boys snickered. Daniel felt heat rise to his cheeks. He wanted to tell them to go away, but the words wouldn't come. They never did when he needed them most. It was like his brain knew what to say, but his mouth couldn't quite catch up. "Come on, say something," Brandon urged, moving closer. "Say basketball, I bet you can't say it right." Daniel stood up, his legs shaky. He wanted to run, but where would he go? The playground monitor was on the other side of the field, too far away to help. Besides, what would he say? That kids were being mean? He'd tried telling teachers before. They'd talk to the kids, maybe give them a warning. But it always made things worse later. "Leave me alone," Daniel finally managed to say, though the words came out softer than he wanted, almost like a whisper. "Leave me alone," Ryan mimicked, exaggerating the slowness of Daniel's speech. The other boys burst into laughter. Daniel felt tears starting to build behind his eyes, but he blinked them away. Crying would only give them more reasons to make fun of him. He'd learned that the hard way during his first week of school. Finally, the boys got bored and wandered off toward the soccer field. Daniel sank back down against the tree, his heart still pounding. He counted slowly to 10, then 20, waiting for his breathing to return to normal. This was just another day. Just another recess. Nothing special about it, nothing new. When school ended, Daniel's mother was waiting in the pickup line like always. Her name was Linda, and she had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The moment Daniel climbed into the back seat, she knew something was wrong. Mothers always knew. "Rough day, sweetheart?" she asked gently, catching his eye in the rearview mirror. Daniel shrugged. He didn't want to talk about it. Talking about it meant reliving it, and he'd rather just forget. Linda didn't push. She'd learned over the years that her son needed space sometimes, time to process his feelings in his own way. Instead, she turned on the radio, letting soft music fill the car as they drove home. Their house was small but cozy, a 2-bedroom place on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Linda worked long hours as a waitress to keep it that way, and every penny was stretched as far as it could go. As soon as they got home, Daniel headed straight for the living room. There against the far wall sat an old upright piano. It had belonged to his grandmother, Daniel's great-grandmother, who had passed away 2 years earlier. The piano was far from perfect. Several keys stuck when you pressed them. The bench wobbled. Some of the white keys had yellowed with age and a few were chipped at the edges, but to Daniel it was the most beautiful thing in the house. He climbed onto the wobbly bench and placed his small hands on the keys. He didn't know how to really play. Nobody had taught him. But there was something about the piano that made him feel better. Something about the way the keys felt under his fingers and the sounds they made when he pressed them. Daniel began to play, if you could call it that. Random notes, no melody, no rhythm, just sounds. But to him, each note was a feeling he couldn't express with words. The low notes were the heavy sadness he felt at lunch. The high notes were the sharp sting of being mocked. The middle notes were everything in between, all the confusion and loneliness that filled his days. Linda stood in the doorway of the kitchen listening. She'd noticed her son's growing attachment to the piano over the past few months. At first she'd thought it was just a phase, something he'd lose interest in like the toy trucks and building blocks. But as time went on, she realized this was different. The piano wasn't a toy to Daniel. It was a friend, maybe his only real friend. She wondered, not for the first time, what would become of her boy. The doctors had told her that children with Down syndrome could learn and grow, that they could live fulfilling lives. But the world wasn't always kind to people who were different. She saw it every day in the way people stared, in the way they spoke to Daniel like he was much younger than he was, in the way opportunities seemed to close before they even opened. As the random notes continued to drift from the living room, Linda made herself a cup of tea and said a quiet prayer. She prayed for strength, for patience, and most of all for the world to see her son the way she saw him. Not as someone broken or less than, but as someone full of potential, full of love, full of life. She had no way of knowing that the old piano would be the key to everything. She couldn't have imagined that those random notes her son played each afternoon would one day transform into something that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone who knew him. For now, all she could do was listen, hope, and believe that somehow, some way, things would get better. The piano music continued until dinner time, filling their small house with sound, with feeling, with the unspoken promise that even in the darkest moments, beauty could still be found. September brought changes to Daniel's school. The biggest change was a new music teacher. Her name was Ms. Patricia, and she was different from any teacher Daniel had met before. She was older, probably in her 50s, with gray hair that she wore in a loose bun. She had laugh lines around her eyes and wore colorful scarves that seemed to match her mood. But what really set her apart was the way she looked at students. Not through them, not past them, but directly at them, like she was really seeing who they were. On her first day, Ms. Patricia introduced herself to each class with the same words. Music isn't just something you listen to. It's something you feel. It lives inside all of us, waiting to come out. My job is to help you find it. Most kids didn't pay much attention. Music class was just another period in the day, somewhere between math and lunch. But Daniel heard those words differently. He thought about the piano at home, about how playing it made him feel less alone. Maybe Ms. Patricia would understand that. The first few music classes were basic. Ms. Patricia taught them simple songs, had them clap rhythms, and talked about different instruments. Daniel participated when he could, though his voice was quieter than the others when they sang and his clapping wasn't always perfectly on beat. Still, he tried. It was during the third week that everything changed. Ms. Patricia had arranged the class in a circle for a rhythm exercise. Each student had to clap a pattern, and the rest of the class would clap it back. When it was Daniel's turn, he felt nervous. His hands started to sweat. He could feel Kevin and Ryan staring at him from across the circle, probably hoping he'd mess up. But Daniel did something unexpected. Instead of clapping a simple pattern like everyone else had done, his fingers began tapping on his knees. The rhythm was complex, layered, nothing like what the other kids had created. It wasn't perfect, and he lost the beat once or twice, but there was something there, something real. The class tried to copy it but couldn't quite get it right. A few kids giggled. but Miss Patricia held up her hand for silence. She was staring at Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Do that again," she said softly. Daniel hesitated, then repeated the rhythm. This time, Miss Patricia tapped along with him, helping him keep steady. When they finished, she was smiling. "That was beautiful, Daniel. Where did you learn that? I don't know," Daniel said slowly, working to form each word. "It just came." After class, as the other students filed out for lunch, Ms. Patricia called Daniel back. He thought maybe he was in trouble, though he couldn't figure out what he'd done wrong. His heart beat faster as he walked toward her desk. "Daniel, I want to ask you something," Miss Patricia said, her voice gentle. "Do you play an instrument?" Daniel nodded. "Piano, at home, but I don't really play. Not real songs. Would you show me sometime?" she asked. "We have a piano in the music room. Maybe during lunch if you'd like." Daniel's first instinct was to say no. The thought of playing in front of someone, even a nice teacher like Miss Patricia, terrified him. What if she laughed? What if she realized he was just pressing random keys and didn't actually know anything about music? But something in her eyes made him trust her. She wasn't looking at him the way other teachers did, with that mix of pity and lowered expectations. She was looking at him like she genuinely wanted to hear him play. "Okay," he whispered. The next day, Daniel found himself in the empty music room during lunch, his usual lunch period, the time he normally spent at the corner table avoiding everyone. The room felt huge with just the two of them in it. The piano sat in the corner, much nicer than the one at home. All the keys were white and clean, and it didn't have any chips or stains. Daniel sat on the bench, his feet barely touching the floor. His hands hovered over the keys, shaking slightly. Now that he was here, he wasn't sure he could do this. What if no sounds came out? What if his fingers forgot what to do? "Take your time," Ms. Patricia said, settling into a chair a few feet away. "There's no rush. No pressure. Just play whatever you want to play." Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath, just like his mom taught him to do when he felt overwhelmed. Then, slowly, his fingers found the keys. The first notes were hesitant, uncertain, but as he continued, something shifted. His fingers began moving more confidently, finding their way across the keyboard. He played a simple melody he'd heard on a commercial once, then transitioned into something else, something he didn't even know he remembered. It wasn't smooth, and he hit plenty of wrong notes, but there was a flow to it, a feeling. When he finished, the room was quiet. Daniel was afraid to open his eyes, afraid to see disappointment on Ms. Patricia's face. But when he finally looked, he saw something completely different. She was leaning forward in her chair, her eyes wide, and there were actual tears on her cheeks. "Daniel," she said, and her voice sounded thick with emotion. "That was incredible. Do you realize what you just did?" Daniel shook his head. He didn't think it was incredible. It was just playing the same thing he did every day at home. "You have a gift," Miss Patricia continued. She moved closer, sitting on the bench beside him. "You might not read music or know the technical terms, but you understand something that can't be taught. You feel the music. You really feel it." Daniel wasn't sure what to say. Nobody had ever called anything he did a gift before. Gifts were things that made you special in a good way. He'd only ever been special in ways that made people stare or whisper or leave him out. Miss Patricia seemed to read his thoughts. "I know the world hasn't been very kind to you, Daniel. I see how the other kids treat you. I see how some of the teachers talk to you like you don't understand things." She paused, making sure he was looking at her. "But I also see something they don't. I see potential. I see talent. And I see a boy who deserves a chance." She told him about an idea she had. She wanted to give him piano lessons, real ones, twice a week after school. She wouldn't charge anything. She just wanted to teach him because she believed in him. They could work together slowly at his own pace. No judgment, no pressure, just learning and growing. "But," she added carefully, "it won't be easy. Learning to play properly takes time and practice. There will be frustrating days. There will be times when you want to give up. I need you to know that before you agree." Daniel thought about it. He thought about how hard school already was, how tired he felt at the end of most days. Adding something else, something that required effort and concentration, seemed overwhelming. But then he thought about those moments at the piano at home, when nothing else mattered. He thought about how the music made him feel whole, like he wasn't broken or wrong or less than everyone else. He thought about Ms. Patricia's words. "You have a gift." Maybe, just maybe, this was something he could actually be good at. Not despite having Down syndrome, but just good at. Period. I want to try, Daniel said, his words coming out clearer than usual, strengthened by determination. Ms. Patricia smiled so wide it seemed to light up the whole room. Then we start next week, Monday after school. Bring that determination with you, Daniel, because we're going to do something amazing together. As Daniel left the music room that day, something felt different inside him. The hallways looked the same. The kids still ignored him or stared. Nothing about his world had actually changed, but something inside him had shifted, like a door had cracked open just a little, letting in a sliver of light he hadn't known was there. He couldn't wait to tell his mom. For the first time in a long time, Daniel had something to look forward to. Something that was his, something that nobody could take away or make fun of or ruin. He had music, and music had him. That afternoon when he got home and sat down at the old piano, his fingers moved with new purpose. He wasn't just pressing keys anymore. He was beginning to learn, to understand, to grow, and even though he didn't know it yet, he was taking the first steps on a journey that would change everything. The music that filled their small house that evening sounded different. Linda noticed it from the kitchen. It wasn't just random notes anymore. There was something intentional about it, something hopeful. She smiled to herself, not knowing why, just feeling that somehow things were starting to shift in the right direction. And she was right. The first real piano lesson was nothing like Daniel had imagined. He thought Ms. Patricia would just let him play whatever he wanted, the way he did at home. Instead, she started with the basics. Hand position, finger numbers, the names of the keys, things that seemed simple but somehow weren't. Each finger has a number, Ms. Patricia explained, holding up her hands. Thumb is 1, pointer is 2, and so on. This helps us know which fingers to use for which notes. Daniel stared at his own hands, trying to remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but when he tried to play using the right fingers, everything got mixed up. His brain knew which finger to use, but his hand didn't always listen. It was frustrating in a way he hadn't expected. It's okay, Ms. Patricia said when she saw his face scrunch up in concentration. This is hard for everyone at first. Even people who've played for years had to start exactly where you are now. But Daniel wondered if that was really true. Did other people's hands feel this clumsy? Did their fingers refuse to cooperate the way his did? Week after week, they practiced. Simple scales, basic exercises, songs with just 5 notes. Daniel worked harder than he'd ever worked at anything. Every Monday and Wednesday, he stayed after school for an hour. And every evening at home, he practiced what Miss Patricia had taught him. Some days were better than others. Some days his fingers found the right keys and the music sounded almost like it was supposed to, but other days nothing worked. He'd hit wrong notes, lose his place, forget which finger was which number. On those days, he wanted to slam the piano lid shut and never come back. The worst part was that learning properly was actually harder than just playing randomly. When he used to sit at the piano at home and press whatever keys felt right, it was fun. Now with rules and techniques and correct finger positions, it felt like work. Hard work that made his head hurt and his hands ache. One Wednesday in October, Daniel had an especially bad lesson. Nothing went right. He couldn't play a simple 5-note scale without messing up. His fingers kept hitting the wrong keys. After the 7th try, he put his hands in his lap and stared down at them. I can't do this, he said quietly. I'm too stupid. Ms. Patricia was silent for a moment. Then she closed the piano book and turned to face him fully. Daniel, look at me. He lifted his eyes, though it was hard. There were tears threatening to spill over, and he didn't want her to see. You are not stupid, she said firmly. Not even close. Do you know how many students I've taught over 30 years? Hundreds. And do you know what I've learned? The ones who succeed aren't always the ones who find it easy. They're the ones who keep going even when it's hard. But everyone else would learn this faster, Daniel said. If you taught Kevin or Brandon, they'd already know how to do it. Maybe, Ms. Patricia admitted. Or maybe not. You know what you have that they don't? You feel the music. When you play, even when you hit wrong notes, there's emotion in it. That's rare, Daniel. That's special. The technique will come with time. But what you have inside you, that can't be taught. Daniel wasn't sure he believed her, but her words made him feel a little better. Enough to try the scale one more time. This time, he got through it with only 2 mistakes instead of 7. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the weeks turned into months, something started to change. The exercises that seemed impossible in September became manageable by November. His fingers slowly learned where to go. The music started making more sense. It was still hard, still required all his concentration, but it was becoming possible. At school, though, things were getting worse. Word had spread that Daniel was taking piano lessons with Miss Patricia. And kids being kids, they found new ways to make fun of him. "Hey, Daniel, gonna play us a concert?" Ryan called out during recess one day. "Maybe you can play Twinkle Twinkle for us." "Oh wait, that's probably too hard for you." The other kids laughed. Daniel's face burned red, but he tried to ignore them. Ms. Patricia had told him that people often made fun of things they didn't understand. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. In music class, things were awkward too. When Ms. Patricia praised Daniel's progress, some students rolled their eyes. A few whispered that she was only being nice to him because she felt sorry for him. Even the praise felt tainted, like it wasn't real, like he was getting special treatment instead of actually earning anything. One afternoon in December, Daniel overheard a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. He was in the music room early, waiting for his lesson, when two teachers walked past in the hallway. They didn't know he was there. "I think it's sweet what Patricia's doing with that boy," one of them said. "But really, what's the point? It's not like he's going to become a real pianist or anything." "I know," the other replied. "She spent so much time on him, time she could use with students who actually have a future in music." Daniel sat frozen at the piano bench. The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. A future in music. Students who actually matter. He'd thought maybe, just maybe, he could be good at this. But maybe everyone was right. Maybe this was all just pretend. Just a nice teacher being kind to the kid nobody else wanted to deal with. When Miss Patricia arrived a few minutes later, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "Daniel, what's the matter?" He didn't want to tell her. Didn't want to repeat those words out loud. But they were sitting heavy in his chest, making it hard to breathe. Finally, in halting words, he told her what he'd heard. Ms. Patricia's expression went through several changes. First surprise, then anger, then something softer. She sat down on the bench beside him, quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember when we started lessons?" she finally asked. "I told you this would be hard. But I didn't just mean the piano. I meant all of it. People's doubts, their judgments, their inability to see past their own limitations." She played a few notes on the piano, a gentle melody. "Those teachers, they're wrong. But you know what? Their wrong opinions don't define your worth or your potential. The only person who gets to decide how far you can go is you." "But what if they're right?" Daniel asked, his voice small. "What if I'm wasting your time?" "Daniel, look at me." She waited until his eyes met hers. "In all my years of teaching, I've never wasted a single moment in this room. And you know why? Because music isn't just about being the best or having a career. It's about growth. It's about finding joy. It's about discovering parts of yourself you didn't know existed." She stood up and walked to her desk, pulling out a folder. Inside were sheets of music, more complex than anything Daniel had played before. "I want to show you something. This is what I want you to work toward, not next week or next month, but eventually." Daniel looked at the music. It was beautiful, full of flowing notes and complex rhythms. It looked impossible. "I could never play that. Not today," Ms. Patricia agreed. "But 6 months ago, you couldn't play a simple scale. 3 months ago, that song you played last week would have seemed impossible. You're growing, Daniel. Every single day you're getting better. And I believe, truly believe, that one day you will play this piece. Maybe not perfectly, maybe with your own unique style, but you will play it." Something shifted in Daniel's chest. The hurt from those teachers' words was still there, but it felt smaller somehow, less important. He thought about how far he'd come since September. All those frustrating hours, all those repeated scales and exercises, they were adding up to something. He could feel it. "I want to keep learning," he said, surprised by the strength in his own voice. "Good," Ms. Patricia smiled. "Because I'm not done teaching you, not by a long shot." That evening, Daniel practiced longer than usual. His mother listened from the kitchen as she prepared dinner, noticing that the music sounded different. More determined, maybe. More purposeful. She didn't know what had happened that day, but she could hear the change in every note. Daniel's fingers moved across the keys, sometimes stumbling, sometimes soaring. Each note was a small rebellion against everyone who doubted him. Each chord was proof that he was more than what people assumed. And somewhere in that music, buried beneath the still imperfect technique and the occasional wrong notes, was something beautiful trying to break free. He didn't know it yet, but he was getting ready for something big. Something that would prove to everyone, including himself, that he'd been worth believing in all along. The journey was hard, harder than he'd ever imagined. But for the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't just surviving. He was becoming something more, and that made every difficult moment worth it. Spring arrived at Daniel's school with posters plastered on every hallway wall. The annual talent show was coming in 6 weeks. Every year, students performed for the entire school, plus parents and families who packed the auditorium to watch. Daniel had seen the talent show before. He remembered kids doing backflips, singing pop songs, performing magic tricks. He remembered the applause, the cheers, the way performers took their bows while everyone clapped. It had always seemed like something that happened to other people, not to him. So when Ms. Patricia brought it up during their Wednesday lesson, Daniel's first reaction was to shake his head before she even finished her sentence. "I want you to perform in the talent show," she said, her voice calm but serious. "I think you're ready." "No," Daniel said immediately. His heart was already racing just thinking about it. "I can't." "Why not?" Because everyone will laugh. Because I'll mess up, because—" He struggled to find the right words. "Because they'll all be watching." Ms. Patricia nodded slowly. "You're right. They will all be watching. The whole school, your classmates, teachers, parents. It's scary. I won't pretend it isn't." "Then why would I do it?" Daniel asked, confused. "Because fear is just a feeling, Daniel. It's not a fact. And sometimes the things that scare us most are the things most worth doing." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You've been working so hard for 8 months now. Don't you want to show people what you can do?" Daniel thought about it. Part of him, a small part buried deep down, did want that. He wanted Kevin and Ryan to see that he wasn't just the weird kid they made fun of. He wanted those teachers who'd said he had no future in music to hear him play. He wanted to prove that he was more than what everyone assumed, but the bigger part of him was terrified. What if he froze on stage? What if his fingers forgot everything they'd learned? What if people laughed not because he was good, but because watching him try was funny? "I don't know if I can," he said honestly. "I'll make you a deal," Ms. Patricia offered. "Practice the piece I give you. Work on it every day for the next 6 weeks. And if when the time comes you really don't want to perform, you don't have to. But at least give yourself the chance to decide later, when you're ready. Not now when you're scared." It seemed reasonable. Daniel agreed, though his stomach still felt tight with worry. The piece Ms. Patricia gave him was beautiful. It was a simplified version of a classical piece, something with a real name and a real composer. Not a beginner's song, but not impossibly hard either. Something right in the middle, challenging but achievable. Daniel threw himself into practicing. Every day after school, before homework, before dinner, he sat at the old piano. His mother would watch sometimes from the doorway, seeing the intense concentration on his face, the way his tongue stuck out slightly when he focused on a difficult section. The first week was rough. His fingers stumbled over the notes and the piece sounded choppy and disconnected. But slowly, day by day, it started coming together. The notes began to flow. The melody emerged. By the third week, Daniel could play through the whole piece without stopping, though there were still plenty of mistakes. At school, the talent show was all anyone talked about. Kids discussed their acts, rehearsed in the hallways, and speculated about who would win the audience's favor. Daniel stayed quiet during these conversations, never mentioning that he might perform. But secrets have a way of getting out. Somehow someone found out that Daniel's name was on the talent show sign-up sheet. By lunch on a Tuesday in late April, everyone knew. "You're seriously going to be in the talent show?" Brandon asked during recess, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You?" A small crowd had gathered, sensing drama. Daniel felt his face grow hot. He wanted to deny it, to say it was a mistake, but lying felt wrong. "Maybe," he said quietly. Ryan laughed, loud and sharp. "This is going to be hilarious. What are you going to do, play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the piano? Maybe if you're lucky, your mommy will clap for you." The other kids snickered. A few looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to say something but didn't know how. Daniel stood there frozen as the laughter washed over him. "At least he's trying something," a voice said. Everyone turned. It was a girl from Daniel's class named Sophie. She wasn't popular, but she wasn't picked on either. She just existed somewhere in the middle, usually keeping to herself. "What did you say?" Ryan asked, his smile fading. "I said at least he's brave enough to try," Sophie repeated, her voice stronger now. "How many of you making fun of him even signed up? Or are you too scared?" The group went quiet. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. After a moment, the crowd dispersed, the entertainment over. Sophie gave Daniel a small nod before walking away. Daniel felt something unfamiliar. Not quite happiness, but not the usual shame either. Someone had stood up for him. More than that, she'd called him brave. He didn't feel brave, but maybe bravery wasn't about not being scared. Maybe it was about doing things even when you were terrified. That afternoon, his lesson with Ms. Patricia went better than ever. His fingers found the notes with confidence. The piece flowed from beginning to end with only 2 small mistakes. When he finished, Ms. Patricia was smiling. "That was beautiful, Daniel. You're ready." "For the talent show?" His voice shook slightly. "For the talent show," she confirmed. "But more importantly, you're ready to show yourself what you're capable of." That's what this is really about. The weeks flew by faster than Daniel wanted. Before he knew it, the talent show was just 3 days away. Then 2 days. Then tomorrow. Then today. The morning of the talent show, Daniel barely touched his breakfast. His stomach felt like it was full of butterflies doing somersaults. His mother noticed but didn't push him to eat. She just squeezed his shoulder and told him she was proud of him no matter what happened. At school, the day crawled by. Every class felt twice as long as usual. During lunch, Daniel couldn't eat. He went to the music room instead, where Ms. Patricia let him practice one more time on the auditorium's piano. "Remember?" she told him as he practiced. "This isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing something real. Your music, your heart, your courage. That's what people will remember." Evening came too quickly. The auditorium filled with people, families streaming in, students bouncing with nervous energy backstage. Daniel stood in the wings, watching performer after performer take the stage. A group of girls danced to a pop song. A boy did a comedy routine that had everyone laughing. 2 kids performed a magic act with a real rabbit. Each act was met with applause and cheers. The audience was in a good mood, happy to be entertained. But Daniel couldn't help wondering what would happen when his name was called. Would they still be cheering? Or would the applause be polite but pitying? Ms. Patricia appeared beside him. She didn't say anything, just placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The warmth of it helped a little. 3 more acts, 2 more. 1 more. Then the student announcer's voice rang out. "Next up, we have Daniel performing on the piano." This was it. No going back now. Daniel's legs felt like rubber as he walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, making it hard to see the audience, though he could sense them there. Hundreds of eyes watching, waiting. He reached the piano, a beautiful grand piano that gleamed under the stage lights. It was much nicer than the one at home, nicer even than the one in the music room. For a second, he worried it would feel different, that his fingers wouldn't know what to do. Daniel sat on the bench. He could hear whispers from the audience, some scattered giggles. He saw Kevin and Ryan sitting in the 3rd row, smirking at each other. He saw teachers watching with curiosity or pity. He couldn't tell which. He saw his mother in the front row, her hands clasped together, her eyes full of love and worry, and he saw Ms. Patricia standing in the side wing, giving him a small nod. "You can do this," her expression said. "I believe in you." Daniel placed his hands on the keys. They were trembling. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. For a terrible moment, his mind went completely blank. He couldn't remember the first note. Couldn't remember anything. Then, somewhere deep inside, the music stirred. Not the notes on a page, but the feeling behind them. The reason he'd fallen in love with the piano in the first place. The way it made him feel less alone, less broken, less different. He took a breath, and he began to play. The first notes floated into the auditorium, soft and clear. Daniel's fingers moved across the keys, and suddenly everything else disappeared. The audience, the lights, the fear. All that existed was the music and the piano and the connection between them. The melody was simple at first, gentle and sweet. But as Daniel continued, it grew richer, more complex. His fingers found their way through the piece, traveling the path they'd practiced hundreds of times. Yes, he hit a wrong note in the second measure. And yes, his timing wavered slightly during a tricky transition. But something else was happening. something that went beyond technical perfection. Daniel was pouring everything into that music. Every lonely lunch, every hurtful comment, every moment he'd felt less than, but also every small victory, every kind word from Ms. Patricia, every hour spent at his grandmother's old piano. The music became all of it, a story told without words, a feeling expressed through sound. The auditorium had gone completely silent, not the polite silence of people waiting for something to end, but the deep silence of people truly listening. Parents who'd been checking their phones put them away. Students who'd been whispering to friends stopped mid-sentence. Even Kevin and Ryan, who'd come ready to laugh, sat frozen in their seats. There was something about the way Daniel played that caught everyone off guard. It wasn't just about the notes. It was about the emotion behind them, the honesty, the vulnerability. When he played a soft section, it felt like hope trying to survive in darkness. When he played the louder parts, it felt like courage finding its voice. Daniel's mother had tears streaming down her face. She'd watched her son struggle for so long, seen him hurt by a world that didn't understand him, worried about what his future would hold. And now here he was on a stage in front of everyone doing something beautiful, something entirely his own. Ms. Patricia stood in the wings, her hand over her mouth. In 30 years of teaching, she'd seen talented students, dedicated students, students who went on to study music in college. But she'd rarely seen anything as pure as this. Daniel wasn't performing to impress anyone. He was simply sharing a piece of his soul, and it was beautiful. The piece built toward its climax, the melody soaring upward. Daniel's hands moved with increasing confidence, the muscle memory taking over, letting his heart guide the music. And then, gently, carefully, he brought it back down to softness, the final notes falling like leaves settling on still water. When he played the last note, his hands remained on the keys for a moment. The sound hung in the air, slowly fading into silence. Daniel sat very still, almost afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had been cast. For what felt like forever but was probably only 3 seconds, nothing happened. The auditorium was absolutely quiet. Daniel's heart sank. They hated it. They were trying to figure out how to react to the kid with Down syndrome who thought he could play piano. Then someone started clapping. It was Ms. Patricia, her applause echoing in the quiet space. Then Daniel's mother joined in. Then Sophie, the girl who'd defended him at recess. Then, like a wave building and building, everyone else. But this wasn't polite applause. This wasn't the kind of clapping you do because you're supposed to. People were on their feet, standing, their applause growing louder and stronger. Some were cheering. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. The sound filled the auditorium, overwhelming and wonderful. Daniel stood up from the piano bench, stunned. He looked out at the audience, really seeing them for the first time. Every single person was standing. Every single person was clapping for him. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because they'd genuinely been moved by what they'd heard. He saw teachers who'd doubted him clapping with tears in their eyes. He saw students who'd ignored him or laughed at him now applauding enthusiastically. He even saw Ryan, his biggest tormentor, clapping hard, his earlier smirk completely gone. The applause went on and on. Daniel didn't know what to do with his hands, where to look, how to react. Finally, remembering what he'd seen other performers do, he took a small bow. The applause somehow got even louder. As he walked off stage, his legs shaking, Ms. Patricia pulled him into a tight hug. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. When she pulled back, her eyes were red and her smile was enormous. The rest of the talent show continued, but Daniel barely registered it. He sat backstage in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. Other performers came off stage, some of them stopping to tell him how amazing he'd been. "Dude, that was incredible," one 8th grader said. "You actually made me cry," a girl admitted. When the show ended and it was time to announce the winners, Daniel wasn't expecting anything. He'd already gotten more than he'd ever hoped for. The audience had listened. They'd actually listened. That was enough. 3rd place went to the magic act. 2nd place went to a girl who'd sung a difficult song beautifully. And 1st place went to Daniel. When his name was called, he almost didn't believe it. Ms. Patricia had to gently push him back onto the stage to accept his ribbon. The audience erupted again as he walked out. This time Daniel managed a real smile, small but genuine. He took the blue ribbon, feeling its weight in his hand, and looked out at all those faces. They were smiling back at him. Really smiling. Not fake smiles or pitying smiles, but real ones. After the show in the lobby, everything felt surreal. Parents Daniel had never met came up to congratulate him. "You have a real gift," one father said. "That was the best performance of the night," a mother told him. Students who'd never spoken to him before wanted to talk, to tell him how much they'd enjoyed his playing. Even more surprising was Ryan. He approached slowly, looking uncomfortable. "Hey, Daniel," he said, not quite meeting his eyes. That was really good. Like seriously good." He paused, shifting his weight. "And I'm sorry. For, being mean. That wasn't cool." Daniel didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to stay angry, to remind Ryan of all the times he'd been cruel. But another part, the part that had just spent months learning that growth was possible, that change was real, decided to take the harder path. "Thanks," Daniel said simply. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The next day at school, everything was different. Kids said hi to him in the hallways. Some asked about his piano playing, genuinely curious. He got invited to sit at different lunch tables. Teachers looked at him with new respect in their eyes, but the biggest change wasn't in how others treated him. It was in how Daniel saw himself. He'd spent his whole life being told in ways big and small that he was less than, less capable, less valuable, less worthy. And somewhere along the way, he'd started to believe it. The talent show hadn't just won him a ribbon. It had proven something far more important. He'd faced his biggest fear, worked harder than he'd ever worked at anything, and achieved something real. Not despite having Down syndrome, but as a person who happened to have Down syndrome and also happened to have talent and determination and heart. Ms. Patricia continued giving him lessons, and Daniel continued improving. He performed at a few community events, at a retirement home, at a small recital. Each time he felt more confident, more sure of himself and his abilities. Months later, when someone asked Daniel's mother what had changed in her son, she thought about it carefully. "He found his voice," she finally said. "Not everyone's voice comes from their mouth. Daniel's comes from his fingers on piano keys. And once he found it, he realized he'd had something to say all along." Daniel never became a famous concert pianist. That wasn't the point of the story, and it had never been his dream anyway. But he did become someone who knew his own worth, who understood that being different didn't mean being less, who'd learned that the people who doubt you are often just people who've never tried to really see you. The old piano still sat in their living room, still out of tune, still missing the same ivory keys. But now when Daniel played it, the music that filled their small house told a different story. Not a story about limitations or disabilities or things that couldn't be done, but a story about courage, about persistence, about a boy who was told he couldn't and decided to prove that he could. And every note, perfect or imperfect, was a reminder that the most beautiful music often comes from the most unexpected places. You just have to be willing to listen.